Open Book Chapter 9. Heaven Shakes, Enemies Stir. Part 1. Signs of Heaven. The moment Ye Tian's chi surged to the peak of Foundation establishment, the heavens above the sword sect shifted. Dark clouds gathered without warning, swirling like an enormous whirlpool in the sky. The midday light dimmed until the world itself seemed drenched in shadow. A low, bone-chilling thunder rumbled through the mountains. Disciples froze mid-breath. Elders lifted their heads sharply. Even the beasts in the forests knelt trembling. Heavenly Tribulation, someone whispered, their voice breaking. At the center of the arena, Ye Tian sat cross-legged, body glowing faintly. His meridians blazed with light, golden chi surging like rivers breaking through a dam. He had done it. He had pushed past the impossible barrier. The golden core realm. But heaven did not allow such breakthroughs without price. A bolt of violet lightning cracked across the clouds, illuminating the heavens with destructive majesty. The air became so heavy that disciples found it hard to breathe, their knees buckling under the divine pressure. Above, the tribulation storm condensed, forming a vortex of punishment. Ye Tian opened his eyes. They burned with determination, yet deep within his gaze flickered the reflection of countless bolts of lightning waiting to descend. And in that instant, his system awakened. System notification. Cultivation breakthrough detected. Golden core realm, initial stage. Stat boosts applied. Vitality, plus 300%. Sword intent capacity, plus 250%. Spirit resistance, plus 200%. Hidden penalty. Tribulation force multiplied times 2 due to system synchronization. Special upgrade. Soul refinement pathway unlocked. Ye Tian's brows furrowed. Twice the normal tribulation. So be it. If heaven sought to destroy him, then he would carve open a path with his sword. Part 2. Lightning falls. The first bolt fell. A spear of divine thunder crashed from the heavens, splitting the sky. The world turned white with radiance, and the ground quaked like it would shatter apart. Ye Tian stood, lifting his sword. Clang. Steel met lightning. The impact sent shockwaves ripping through the arena, flattening nearby disciples and hurling stones like leaves in a storm. The force scorched his arms, lightning crawling across his skin like living serpents. His teeth clenched, smoke rising from his body. Yet his sword did not break. Come again, he roared, voice echoing through the storm. The clouds answered with fury. A second bolt, thicker, darker, carrying the weight of judgment itself, descended with unstoppable might. This time he could not block fully. The strike tore into his chest, ripping flesh, searing meridians. His knees buckled, blood pouring from his lips. His vision swam. But in that pain, he saw clarity. Every strike of lightning was tempering him, breaking and remaking. The sword in his hand hummed, resonating with the storm, feeding on his defiance. System log. Lightning resistance gained. Body tempering progress. 12% right arrow, 28% right arrow, 41%. Sword intent resonates with heavenly Tao. Ye Tian laughed bitterly through the blood. So even heaven itself becomes my forge. Part 3. Enemies watching. Far beyond the sect's walls, hidden figures stirred. On distant peaks, cloaked cultivators from rival sects watched the storm with narrowed eyes. That aura, someone is breaking through under heavenly tribulation. And not just anyone, it's him, the sword sect's rising demon, Ye Tian. A gaunt man in black robes sneered. He cannot be allowed to live. If he truly steps into Golden Core, he will become a nightmare for us all. Another spy nodded grimly. The sect masters will not sit idly by. Orders will come soon. And in the shadows of the imperial city, even deeper powers stirred, ancient gazes turning toward the storm-torn sky above the sword sect. Heaven's punishment had revealed Ye Tian to the world. Part 4. Sword Domain Awakens. The ninth strike fell. It was monstrous, lightning the size of a mountain, descending like a judgment meant to erase everything below. Ye Tian raised his sword once more, body battered, spirit stretched to its limits. The disciples below screamed, certain he would be annihilated. But in the instant before the bolt struck, something within him burst free. The world changed. Blades. Every gust of wind became a blade. Every strand of grass shimmered like a sword. The mountains in the distance seemed edged, as though waiting for his command. A domain. His sword intent had transcended comprehension. It had spilled into reality itself. The prototype of a sword domain. With a roar, he slashed upward. The sword chi was boundless, tearing through space, fusing with the very storm. The mountain-sized lightning shattered against it, exploding into 1,000 streams of scattered light. The sect shook, disciples cried out in disbelief, and rival spies trembled in terror. On that day, heaven's wrath was cut open by a single man. System alert. Sword domain, prototype unlocked. Range, 15 meters. Effect, all within domain obey the sword. Ye Tian stood in the eye of the storm, his hair whipping wildly, his aura blazing like a god of swords. And in the heavens above, the storm began to fade, leaving behind silence and awe. The golden core realm was his. But so too was the enmity of every rival who had witnessed his defiance of heaven. Cross Chapter 9 end. Open Book Chapter 10, Sect Wars begin. Part 1, The Whispering Wind. Word travels faster than steel. From the highest ridge to the smallest hamlet, the story spread like wildfire. Under Heavenly Tribulation, the sword sect had birthed a golden core cultivator who cleaved lightning, who bent a tribulation to the will of his blade. The rumor carried not only awe but a growing thread of dread. Farmers who had never seen a sword fight spat on their palms and whispered the name as though invoking fate, Ye Tian. In distant sect halls, crimson seals were torn open, and messengers ran until their lungs burned. The major families gathered around lacquered tables, and at each noble brow the same question took shape. If a mere youth in the sword sect could arrest heaven, what stood between such a man and domination? Rivalries ancient as mountain rock twisted into a single motive, removed the seed before it grew into a storm. Within the sword sect, the aftermath was a mixture of reverence and militarization. The elders who had once argued over doctrine now barked orders with a new chill. Gate plans were redrawn. Cultivation brethren who had scorned Ye Tian the month before now pressed for him to take a leading role. The sect's veins pulsed with a new rhythm, readiness. Ye Tian found himself at the center of it, not by ambition, but by consequence. He had emerged from tribulation raw and altered, the prototype of a domain humming like a newly lit star inside him. He wore the scars as if they were chapters, and each disciple who bowed at his passing treated him as both bulwark and battering ram. System notice. Global flag raised. Ye Tian golden core visibility. Threat level. High, multiple factions alerted. New task issued. Sect mission, defend the foundation. Rewards, sect resource grants, elite titles, temporary domain wards. The system's mission, prompt blinked bright before his eyes, as if marking this moment with ink. Defend the foundation. The words were deceptively simple. In truth, they represented a crucible. If the sword sect survived, its position in the world would harden into legend. If it failed, extinction or subjugation. Ye Tian read the mission and felt the weight of it like steel across his palm. He did not want titles. He wanted to be left alone to ascend. Yet the world no longer allowed retreat. Gather the fighting brothers, he said quietly to the head instructor. Train the novices, set traps along the northern ridge, signal beacons at dusk. If they come, we fight not for glory, but for the quiet that lets cultivation breathe. The elders exchanged looks, then nodded. The sword sect's reply would be steel and song. Part 2, The Gathering Storm. It came faster than anyone had hoped. A coalition of 3 mid-tier sects and 2 powerful families, each with reasons of their own, rolled toward the sword sect like an iron tide, banners snapping coldly in the wind. Skirmish riders were the first to arrive, their horses' hooves tearing the earth into grooves. Scouts returned with reports. Assassins had already attempted to infiltrate outer rings. Spy priests whispered of a bounty placed on one specific young man. Ye Tian stood on the watchtower as the morning sun painted blood over the valley. He watched the approaching host and felt a curious calm. Below him, disciples prepared. Powder for fire sky traps, arrays etched in the red earth, formation calls practiced until voices bled. Mothers pressed wrapped dumplings into the hands of fighters. The sect felt like a lung inhaling in preparation for a scream. "Leader," an elder said, bowing, "we have arranged the walled formations and the domain wards, but our numbers are thin. Should we request allied reinforcements?" Ye Tian frowned. "Allies will bring politics. We need speed. Train the best to be hunters." Then, softer, "And spread word to the eastern outposts. Anyone who fights for our foundations will be counted among our sworn." He did not know if the wider world would answer. But the system's mission offered a currency that moved hearts. Titles, grants, even temporary wards to be used in the field. The small mercenary bands and isolated houses, the kind with nothing but a name to gain, heard the promise and sharpened their spears. System update. Mission: defend the foundation. Accepted by 1,312 participants, allied and volunteer count. Active buff: coordinated formation plus 10% for named allies within domain-protected perimeter. The odds were not in their favor. That mattered little. What mattered was precision. Part 3, the first clash. The morning the war ignited, the sky was clear, an ironic calm before carnage. From the southern ridge the allied hosts struck. Arrows darkened the air like a flock of black birds. Spellcasters huddled behind banners and prepared their incantations. The sword sect's outer guards met them, then the drumtones changed. Ye Tian's orders were simple: hold the choke points, then strike from the heart. The idea was not to win a pitched war that day, but to make the invaders bleed enough that their commanders reconsidered. The first wave crashed against the walled palisades like waves against a cliff. Ye Tian's men met them with sword and oath. He moved within the fray like a wind through chimes, quick, precise, merciless. His blade was no longer only steel, it was a language of command. With a flick of his wrist, he rendered an enemy's spear obsolete. With a sweep, he braided a dozen attacks into a single devastating arc. That was when the battlefield shifted into legend. The invaders unleashed a cloud of sword chi, thousands of razor-edge motes that lived between flesh and faith. They thought to cut down untrained ranks and force a rout. Instead, the sword sect's own untrained ranks, under Ye Tian's guidance, turned those specks into instruments. Ye Tian raised his palm, and the world filled with blades. From the ground erupted towers of condensed sword chi, each a vertical city of honed death. Arrows struck these towers and shattered into harmless light. The attackers' motes struck and were diffused, feeding instead into Ye Tian's pattern. Where hostile sword chi hit, it grew into pillars that his followers rode like currents, slashing through enemy lines. The field became a cathedral of steel. Elders watched as formations Ye Tian had only practiced in the empty hours executed without falter, because he had grafted his intent into them. System log. Tactical command, adaptive formation ingrained. Follower sync rate, plus 32% under Ye Tian's active sword intent. Territory effect, sword hell, presence increases enemy morale drain by 24%. The attackers faltered. Men who had charged with banners high found themselves slashed by the very chi they had hoped would win them glory. Panic spread. Commanders shouted for retreat. But retreat was not so easily called. Part 4, the sword hell. Once the domain took root, the battlefield mutated. What the attackers had meant to use as a weapon, sword chi, became a graveyard. The wind itself seemed to harden into blades, carrying the high, thin note of steel. Fields that had been full of grass now rose like serrated teeth. Horses screamed as invisible edges nicked their flanks. Men who had never seen the inside of a forge's mouth learned instantly what it was to be ground. Ye Tian walked the line like an artisan of death, his steps light, his voice a metronome. Left flank, hold, don't overextend. Trap at the 5th Ridge ignite on signal, where he gestured an army folded and struck like a well-read poem. At one point, a general from the Allied host, a hulking man who wore 7 scars and a belt of trophies, surged forward determined to cut Ye Tian down personally. He believed that toppling the source would topple the house of cards. They met in a fury of sparks. The general drove a great saber with the force of a slammed gate. Ye Tian moved like water around the gatepost, his sword a whisper of cold. Where the saber struck, the ground flared. Where Ye Tian cut, the air itself unraveled into shards. No blood spurted theatrically. Instead, the general's blade shattered mid-swing and fell in glittering fragments as if the universe itself refused to honor that strike. The general's men watched their leader fall and turned to run. That was when the real terror set in. Soldiers seeing their commanders undone by an almost preternatural order, an order rooted in one unbending young man. Sword Demon. Someone breathed on the battlefield later. The name leapt like a spark to hay. By dusk, the invaders had retreated beneath a hail of lost banners and broken spears. Fields had been torn down to the soil. The sword sect's losses were not negligible. Many brave souls had fallen, but the cost was contained. More importantly, the sword sect had shown it could take a blow and retort with an iron fate. Part 5. Aftermath and Reputation. News traveled again, but this time it carried screams and awe in equal measure. Traders who had watched the fighting from the mountains returned with tales of the sword hell. Merchants renamed themselves to avoid traveling that road. Villages barricaded doors when night fell. Rival sects reevaluated their plans and convened in darkened halls. Within the sword sect, gratitude turned to a kind of religious adoration. Disciples lit incense and placed small iron charms that resembled Ye Tian's emblem. They did not worship him as a god, at least not yet, but there was a tilt toward fervor that made elders uneasy. Ye Tian, however, did not stand basking in praise. He walked among the wounded, tended to the dying with a tenderness that cut deeper than any blade. He sat by a young recruit whose leg had been sliced open and spoke of patience, of the weight of blades, of an honest life before war combusted into fervor. He knew the war was only beginning. He also knew the cost of being the signal fire that summoned storms. System Record. Title unlocked. Sword Demon Interim. Reputation Modifier, +14. New quest available. Seek allies or sever ties. Rewards. Long-term supply lines or immediate domain-grade wards. When night fell, the sect's elders convened around a low map table. Ye Tian, bleeding and exhausted, placed his palm over the carved symbol of the sword sect and whispered, "If they come again, we will be ready. Not because we want war, but because we cannot permit extinction." The elders nodded, some with tears catching the light. Beyond the valley, in high places and hidden rooms, the world turned and the chessboard rearranged itself. An empire hearsay moved as one accord. A new piece had entered the board, and all players repositioned their hands. End Chapter 10. Open Book Chapter 11, Legacy of the Sword Ancestor. Part 1, A Song from the Deep. Victory leaves an echo. The battlefield's silence still hummed in Ye Tian's bones when he felt it, a pull like a note struck in the depth of the earth, subtle at first, then insistent. He could not place it with his eyes. It spoke to the sword intent in him. "Our southern subhall is shaking," reported a junior elder. "Not earthquake, something under the ground." They went when the sun was high. What they found was not an ordinary cavern, but a buried ruin, half swallowed by roots and woven with ancient runes that shimmered with a faint blue light. The elders fell to their knees before the carvings. Ye Tian stepped forward like someone pulled by an invisible thread. The carvings depicted a figure, tall, masked, and wielding a sword that split mountains. Scenes unfolded across the stone, disciples kneeling, blades raised, and a final mural of a dome of light that resembled a completed sword domain. The words beneath were old, older than the sect itself. "He who inherits the will shall carry the path." "Sword Ancestor," breathed the head elder. The name was reverent, fragile like glass. Ye Tian's system pinged as if an answer. System prompt. Discovery, sealed ruin, sword ancestor's reliquary. Available quest. Inherit the sword ancestor's will. Rewards, fragmented intent, ancestor skills, domain amplification. Warning, sealing mechanisms active. Trials within may test Dao heart and affinity with sword intent. A choice wrapped in destiny. The sect had always told stories of an ancestor who once carved the world's veins with a blade. To touch that legacy was to stand on a step many feared ascension would topple them from. Part 2, the sealed trial. The reliquary could be opened only at the cost of something resonant. A measure of sword intent, a memory, a pledge. Ye Tian's presence alone was not enough. The runes demanded that the inheritor demonstrate a concordance with the ancestor's Tao. The first gate was of skill. Illusions rose that tested technique, phantoms of steel replicating forms never taught within the modern sect. Ye Tian's sword moved like a translator for an old language buried in his bones. Each strike answered a rune, and each rune melted away. The system logged each response, a ledger of growth. The second gate attacked the heart. Images emerged, not enemies, but scenes of his past. The orphan nights under a tin roof, the day he had failed to save a friend, the faces he had learned to close off to continue onward. The carvings reached into memory, seeking cracks. Ye Tian did not flinch. He allowed the faces to stand there and then folded them into a vow. He would not be led by past cowardice. With each vow, a chain on the reliquary glowed and one more seal dissolved. The third gate was a whisper of the future, a branching of possibilities. It showed potential endings, a road lined with corpses under the banner of his name, a throne of swords propped by the bones of those who bowed too quickly, another path where he stepped away and cultivated quietly, the world still dangerous but poorer for what might have been. The trial did not prescribe one path, but demanded he choose the weight he would shoulder. Ye Tian's reply was quiet. I fight so others may live to cultivate. The words were honest and cut simpler than any sword. The final seal accepted it. Part 3, Fragments of Intent. The reliquary opened with the sound of 100 distant swords singing. Dust became light and formed into fragments, small shards of blue like frozen starlight. When Ye Tian extended his hand, the shards hovered and then reassembled in a dance across his palm, threading into his sword intent like additional chords in a loom. With each fragment his senses expanded. Techniques not merely of foot and wrist, but of proportion and metaphysical geometry unspooled in his mind, forms that could bend a foe, will before the first cut. A secondary blade technique appeared, the ancestors' subtle art of using afterimage slices to trap intention. System upgrade. Skill granted. Ancestors Echo afterimage slicing technique, Tier I. Domain enhancement. Sword domain resonance plus 12%, passive. Lore unlocked. Paths beyond golden core, nascent soul foreshadowing. Moreover, the murals hinted at a higher path, a chart of refinement beyond golden core leading to the nascent soul. The stair was long, and the murals only sketched the first steps, but the implication was magnetic. The sword ancestor had once set foot in a place Ye Tian had only begun to glimpse. Part 4, a shifting balance. Inheriting the fragments did not make him invulnerable. Rather, it tilted the balance. Where before he had been a rookie who had astonished fate, now he carried a lineage in his chest. That lineage demanded stewardship. Rival sect spies, always hungry for artifacts, grew desperate. They attempted to steal away with the reliquary's shards under moonlight, masked figures, poisoned darts, betrayals staged by those who had thought the sword sect weakened. Each attempt was met with the sect's sharpened defenses. Ye Tian's name now opened doors of fear. It also painted targets across his back. But the benefits were immediate. Training halls filled with new forms taught under Ye Tian's guidance. Young disciples found their steps measured to a tune they had never heard before. The ancestors' echo became a new standard, and slowly the sword sect's style changed into something with teeth, ancient teeth. Elders recorded the relic's scripts and preserved what could be preserved. They instituted a small conclave to protect the reliquary and to plan how best to cautiously use what power they had found. Ye Tian, who had once been content to hide, found himself as a living map of the sect's future. Part 5. Foreshadowing the path ahead. Before Ye Tian left the reliquary, he had one last vision, carved not into stone but into the marrow of possibility. A mural showed a narrow bridge over an abyss where a figure walked carrying a glowing seed. Above, the sky was fretted with lights, heavenly entities. Underneath, a path wound toward a luminous citadel, the murals labeled in a tongue older than any tongue in the sect. The system summarized it like a ledger closing. The road beyond Golden Core would lead to nascent soul, and whoever followed the sword ancestor's path would need not only strength, but the unshakable Tao heart to resist the seduction of dominance. The mural's final scene was not of victory, but of sacrifice, someone letting fall a blade, and in so doing opening a gate. Ye Tian left the reliquary quieter than when he'd entered, as if the relics had tempered the last of his brashness. The fragments of ancestor intent had grown his capability, but they had also expanded his responsibilities. On the path toward power, the weight of legacy rested heavy. System note. Quest update. Inherit the sword ancestor's will, major reward claimed. New path unlocked, nascent soul questline introductory stay, conditions, Tao heart trial upcoming. When the sun sank that night, the sword sect's watchtower saw a new light blazing across the valley, less a signal of alarm, more a symbol of prepared strength. Far beyond the land, those who watched and waited took note. The sword sect had not only defended itself, it had resurrected something old, and old things tend to attract older enemies. End chapter 11.